we are very excited for today because our panelists have already prepared a lot and pull out a lot of time to put all these things together. And as we are somewhat in the transition back into the normal phase, and just to let you know a little bit more, to reflect the Around the Globe webinar series is a continuing webinar series that we have started early on 2 years ago. And it is a partnership between ACPA, CGDSD, and IASIS. So the whole process has been very exciting for us. So hopefully today you will walk away with a lot of helpful information, or even make some new colleagues and friends along the way. So thank you for being here again today. And we will move over to the next slide. Sorry, just to make sure you mute yourself. Thank you. Yeah, so like I said, this webinar series is between collaboration between ACPA and IASIS. If you have more information, if you want more information about us, feel free to let us know. We'll share them as well. But our main goal is to connect everyone in the student affairs, professional services around the world to chat more about student support, development, and stuff like that. So I'm going to move over to let our panelists introduce themselves. And let's start with Carla.
Welcome aboard. Red line, run 909.
Carla, do you want to introduce?
I was going to say, yeah, thank you. I was going to say the train's introducing me, actually. It says welcome. So good morning, everyone. I'm Carla Fraser. I've been a 20-year professional in higher education. 10 of that have been abroad in 7 countries, Asia, Malaysia, sorry, not Malaysia, but Singapore, the Caribbean and Dominica, as well as the UAE, where I first started my international career. And most recently in West Africa, Niger, and I've also been in Bangladesh. My focus has been just student affairs overall. Currently, I'm not at the university. I'm working with my own organization doing consulting. So that's where you see Rose Apple Global comes in. So I consult for higher ed institutions in the student affairs area.
Thank you. Munita, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Munita Dankutsia, and I'm from South Africa. I'm situated in Bloemfontein, which is one of our provinces, and I work at the University of the Free State. Our institution's got 41,000 students, with the majority of them being really vulnerable students, more to the poor side. So I'm really excited about our conversation today. I've been in student affairs for a vast number of years. So yes, thank you to meet you.
Great to meet you as well. Thank you. Sean, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Schofield. I currently work as Executive Director of Career Services at Muhlenberg College, which is a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. But I've worked at a few different institutions in America. And excited about this panel, particularly because I've recently defended my my PhD dissertation, and the topic was on leadership through COVID-19. So it's an exciting time to talk about this, and I look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you for the short introduction to all of you. So as you all know, that today our session is on reflecting on career services in higher ed. So when COVID-19 hit, a lot of things has changed, especially in terms of like student affairs, professional support for students, because a lot of things has gone virtual. Students who were looking for internships, co-ops, midway through all this different experience had to go virtual without any prior knowledge and experience on how to navigate through these experiences. And on the flip side, us as student affairs professionals, we also had to move into virtual experiences and all the different things that we have to come up with creative ideas in terms of like supporting our students in different ways. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of us have stumbled across many different challenges and obstacles, and not really sure how to move over them. So today, after so long after COVID-19 hit, we would like to come together and reflect on how has things changed? Has any of these experiences caused any inequities in systems for students, for underprivileged students and stuff like that, and all these different things. So the format for today is that we will ask 4 questions and our panelists will answer to those questions. And then throughout the conversation, like I said at the beginning of the session, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the question, shall we? So our first question is, how has COVID-19 changed the way students access career and experiential learning opportunities? So whoever wants to go first.
Well, I think the important thing to realize is that a lot of part of it is virtual. So the conversion from a student going to a company or experiential learning has become virtual. And I think that's been the biggest thing. And I think that's, the key piece that you've mentioned so far. Their experiential learning, whether that be at an internship or whether that be student leadership development, student development and career development in other ways, became a place where it was like what we're doing right now. It's on Zoom, it's in WhatsApp, it is completely virtual conversations is what's happening. Now, I would say that the opportunities, and thankfully so, on the other side of the coin, whether it's an internship, a company, an NGO, they have also figured out how to engage our students. It's been a bumpy road, I think, but I think they're learning, they have learned. I would say the tech companies got it a little bit quicker than some of the others. But I think those are some of the biggest changes. And I think students have had to figure out how to adapt to like virtual one-on-ones. Projects are more computer-based than being in the office. Some of the camaraderie that they would get and develop are some of the changes in that experience.
Yeah, I
Sean?
agree. I definitely agree. What Carla's saying, it's totally true. And what a shakeup it was when everybody went virtual. I think one of the challenges is that COVID-19 and actually the kind of resulting lockdowns from COVID-19 and the transitions have created gaps. I know that the National Association of Colleges and Employers in America put out the 2022 employment survey, and they identified a number of areas where students are actually too overconfident in their abilities with respect to things like communication. I know that with employers that we're working with, a lot of them have talked about the challenges of students just losing that 2 years of face-to-face communication. So when they're in an interview or something, it sometimes feels like catch up. So I think that in addition to obviously the transition to virtual, the problems that have been caused by it and the things that we're trying to kind of identify, the opportunities we're identifying in order to hopefully catch students up more quickly, has definitely been a big challenge and a big priority in our office.
Thanks for that, colleagues. I want to agree from South Africa with that. And what happened in South Africa in more or less 2016 is we had a severe uprising in terms of the Fees Must Fall campaign, where students rose to the occasion and, after a lot of gender-based violence attacks, they said, we've had enough. And most of the campuses were closed for about 3 to 5 months. In South Africa, virtual learning by that stage was a non-entity, and we suddenly had to get things in place. Work readiness workshop to really get a program that helps you to think, where should I go? What do I think about? How do I prepare myself? All online.
Wow. So I myself was also affected by the COVID-19 because I graduated for my master's in May 2020. So I didn't have graduation and was trying to plan a lot of different things as well. So that was good. Thank you so much for sharing that. Moving on to our next question. How have higher education leaders responded to these changes in work and experiential learning after COVID-19? maintained? How has support shifted as well? So based on everything you've just said, whoever wants to go first.
I would say that one thing that we really focused on, and a lot of my peers here, especially in our network of institutions, is on creating more intentional pipelines. So right now, so many of our employers are still virtual or doing experiential learning in a hybrid format. And it absolutely creates some challenges because, you know, walking in the door at an organization is an opportunity to network, to have conversations with people, to engage with folks and really get more of a feeling of the culture. So one of the things that we've really focused on is pushing experiential learning much earlier in the student's career. So for the longest time, we focused on that penultimate, you know, junior year internship is your best shot at, you know, converting to a job or getting a real deep dive into something that you might be interested in. But without having that opportunity, we've focused on getting students out in their first year and said, in the winter time, we do our first shadow, and that's a 1 to 5 day kind of go to an organization. Usually we use alumni for this because they tend to be our strongest connections and employers. But they go and shadow people for 1 to 5 days so that they can start getting those opportunities. But we also train those students to be very intentional with what they're doing with their time. So for instance, when you are there and you're in someone's presence, how are you showing up? That's really important. And then also, how do you kind of navigate networking while you're there? Because if we can change that shadow, if it's a great experience and you're enjoying it and you feel like you have a connection to the employer or to the host, then how can you start the conversation about, you know, I'm looking towards the future and looking at internships. Do you have that? Because we as a career center are happy to work with students in order to kind of create those opportunities. But I think that the biggest push has been moving earlier and earlier in the student's career and asking lighter and lighter lifts of our hosts because we're just trying to get that exposure as quickly as possible.
I would echo Sean's sentiment. I with universities and colleges are really trying to big area that I think has had to make the most shift on the campus in order to build those relationships earlier, to get students placed earlier so that they have a trajectory into a company or a field much sooner than we would normally be doing that. So I think that's one of the key ways the institutions have adapted is their partnerships with employers, partnerships with organizations, partnerships with, you know, things like study abroad, now that that's coming back into play, in internships globally, I think is one of the key ways that have adapted. I think senior leadership at institutions have realized that this is one of the areas that they need to put funding in because their graduation rates need to continue to be high. And a piece with that is the experiential learning piece, which is the leadership development, the workshops on that also needs to continue. And so they also need to put funding into that. So I think that's the second part, coupled with the diversity and inclusion that we're seeing, particularly in the United States, and how to bridge those gaps. So I think those are the three places, I think, to answer the second part of the question, that leadership has had to adapt.
From our side, one of the things that we had to urgently address was the lack of skills that we realized students have to actually survive on a more virtual computer-based platform. Also, if you think of students having to go back to their homes and there's no connectivity, there's no devices, they've got no support systems, there's no space in these small homes where they can actually sit and study. So then they have to study at night or, you know, do career exploration at night or early in the morning when the other people in the house were still sleeping. So we really had to look at the modules that we offer and to look at a skill set in terms of computer literacy, looking at how we can get devices to our students as soon as possible, looking at zero-rated networks, zero-rated internet, and to really get our students to a place where they understand social media etiquette. I'm not sure if the other colleagues experienced it well, but it's like they don't know how to navigate that platform and how to use it to their advantage.
Thank you. I think these are all very important shifts. And I know for myself that Malaysia also have some problems with students having not enough all the support in terms of like navigating through the internet, not having devices. Students were, a lot of different siblings were using the same devices to go for classes. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing those. And let's move on to our next question that somehow quite relates, is how has career development changed within your institution or with partners, employers after COVID-19? You kind of touch on that a little bit more, but perhaps you can expand on those.
I would say that it's how we prepare our students, I think, is one of the biggest things that how career services has changed. And I would again agree. I think when I was in Niger, West Africa for my last institution, it was talking about and doing workshops in what we call our professional series about etiquette, about personal branding, about all these things that we would not be teaching or doing development on at such an early stage in their college experience. Typically, this is a second year, third year experience, and if you're in a 3-year model, it's your second year. But we really needed to push that sooner because students need to do that. It's what is the proper things in this space to do that. I also think that employers had to be a little bit more patient in the process in understanding the skill sets or the lack of skill sets as we all adapted into this new platform, new sphere. There's not the coaching that used to happen, because when you're in the in-person setting, you probably would pick up a mentor in your in your space, and they would help coach you. That doesn't happen as much, and you had to figure out how to help students find someone virtually to coach them, find a mentor. Whereas, if you went to networking sessions within your company or within your organization, you could meet someone that you gelled with or that had an interest that you had, and you can have those conversations. Now it's figuring out how to connect those students, and the employers had to figure that out as well as the institutions.
I think one of the challenges that we face, and I know that that both my colleagues have touched on this, is the change that we've experienced with relationships with employers. So for instance, before COVID-19, on-campus recruiting was a really effective mechanism that we could get students in front of employers and employers in front of students. And without being able to bring employers to campus, a huge shift that we noticed early was that employers did not want to stop having that contact. So they would just do a bunch of info sessions virtually. And that's a great idea, but students that were participating in that, the participation dropped off immensely. Because I think that as a student goes to a webinar and they're sitting there and they keep their cameras off and they don't feel super engaged, and it's different than when someone's standing in front of you. So in order to try to remedy this, what we did was we transitioned and we said, let's work with employers in a more topical nature. So what we did was we would talk about specific areas of business and specific methods for breaking into industry. And we would invite panelists either from similar industries or sometimes very different industries, and we would talk about it. We called it hiring hacks. And we were like, let's talk about key issues that are happening in industry right now and bring panelists in. They can talk about their company, they expose the students to their company, the students can engage with them, but it doesn't feel like a, hi, I'm here to learn about your company. It feels more like, wow, these are big problems that we're trying to solve, and this is how different companies are doing it. So by adding that element, it became a really successful program for us, and we've continued it now, even though we're in person, because we can keep pulling on that virtual nature, because I mean, geographically, sometimes it's tough for these, large employers to want to come to Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's not New York City. So we definitely are continuing that trend of saying, let's focus on a topic, especially a topic that might resonate with students, and then let's bring employers in as experts, and then allow that kind of natural synergy to develop between the students and those employers.
One of the things that I definitely experienced the last year and a half was within South Africa and as well as globally, but the amount of companies that don't host any internships anymore, or they are taking away opportunities from students, or the only possibility that you have is some kind of virtual internship, and it still doesn't address that need that you have to develop your skills. Along with the worldwide retrenchments that we saw, that created almost an urgency and a bit of almost a panicky feeling amongst students, creating a feeling that, I am not going to get work. I am not going to have a career. What do I do to navigate this process? And what we're seeing at the moment is that our career officers are actually busier than ever, because there's an urgency that developed to say, I need to upskill myself and embrace the opportunities that I have so that I can actually get somewhere after I finish my degree.
If I could jump back in for a second, I think one of the other things that have come out of this is entrepreneurship.
Yes.
I would say that career services has really become a spot for students developing their entrepreneurship ideas. And I also think career services teams have had to learn a bit more entrepreneurship language, processes, skill development in the entrepreneurship world, because students are then, because they don't feel that they can get jobs, they don't feel that companies are hiring because they've seen their parents, their aunts, uncles, brothers retrenched, lost their positions. They're like, I need to develop something for myself. And so you see institutions addressing this through incubators and accelerators. You also see some companies trying to figure this out as well. But I think that is a space that has really started to blossom a lot more. And career services has been trying to pick up a part of that with the development in that area. So helping students write reports, help students understand how they pitch to a potential investor. A lot of those things are becoming skill sets that were not traditionally in student services, in career services that you're seeing that are being developed right now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those. We definitely see a huge change in the trends in terms of like what is more interested for students, maybe more medical related courses. And then we see that a lot of interest in entrepreneurship. And then a lot of students were also feeling like not wanting to go to college because they are not very certain about all these different plans and stuff. So panelists, could you tell us a little bit more about when COVID-19 surged? Since many employers and institutions turned into virtual internships and opportunities, and you've also talked a little bit about these posing a little bit of new concerns and systemic inequities. Can you expand on those, and how have higher education leaders respond to them?
I think in the United States, this has been a time period when it's never been more in everybody's face that there are systemic problems that we're suffering from. I think that one of the positive outcomes from this advocacy around this issue is that college, when you think of college, and one of the ways we view college, and I don't know who I should say we, one of the ways I view college, I should say, is that it should be kind of a lever for social mobility. And part of the way that we enforce that is by providing access to social capital through our alumni network, through the employers that come to campuses and things of that nature. One of the challenges that we've really seen taking place, in addition to what other panelists have mentioned, in that transition of students going home, we learned that college is sometimes like a safe haven for students. And it's one of the only places in some of their lives where they can prioritize academic learning. If we just think about the hierarchy of needs, you know, if you're suffering from food insecurity or another major issue that's serious, like a crisis, you're not going to be thinking about physics. You're not going to be thinking about your career steps. So one of the things that we've actually really focused on, and a lot of our peer institutions have focused on, is the fact that we have to start understanding what areas of higher education are rooted in privilege and how can we address that. So for instance, taking an internship, a lot of people don't think of it in this nature, but it demonstrates privilege, right? You have to be able to economically sustain. And a lot of our most disadvantaged students are the ones that have the hardest time finding internships because they cannot afford, you know, a lot of them are working to support families at home. They're working to support parents. They're working to support their own children. And they're really not able to take this, but we know internships are really a fantastic method that you can then transition that into. It's a great career experience, and it can transition to a powerful outcome. So what we've been doing is focusing a lot of our funding, and a large part of our comprehensive campaign and comprehensive campaigns across American institutions that I've been following closely, is this access to paying students to be able to take these internships, because we are well aware, and it came, I think, a lot from COVID, of this just in your face, wow, this is privilege. And we really need to be addressing this and understanding all the different areas of privilege that we kind of take for granted on college campuses, or many people take for granted. Not everybody, I shouldn't say that.
I would say, coming from a global lens, I think it was already mentioned, but things like the lack of equipment. So not having a computer, sharing a computer, internet, not having internet at home. And I was in a place where the only device the student had was their mobile, and the only access they had was data. And that doesn't work. And for example, in a place like Bangladesh where I worked, where once the student went home to the outlying areas of outside of the city of Dhaka where the university was, they had little to no data access. So accessing an internship or accessing even coursework was little to impossible. And so you see the inequity globally exponentially compared to what you may have seen in the United States, because the infrastructures were not there in the same capacity. Countries didn't have the robust internet to be able to, for a university to pull into. The infrastructure on campus did not exist. You know, we didn't have things like Coursera and edX are not things globally, and some global institutions have the ability to tap into that, places like Europe, but places like on the South America, you know, on the continent of Africa, some of the outlying other developing and emerging countries don't have those kinds of access. And so this is where you saw education become a significant inequity globally, although it's supposed to be a social economic climate factor globally. And so you still have schools that are not fully back into session because they can't career development, entrepreneurship, the workforce. What are we doing? Not to mention, if we're supposed to meet the UN Development Goal 4 at E4.3, which is higher education and equity in higher education, and accessibility and meaningful work that comes in the other SDGs, COVID has really put us behind the 8 ball, although I think we're making strides towards that.
COVID definitely emphasized the divide. And what we experienced, especially in South Africa, is that data is very expensive in South Africa. So it's very, very difficult for all students to have access to enough data to actually be able to do their academic work, to search for career opportunities, to navigate wherever they need to network with. The other challenge that we experienced during the COVID time was that our national energy provider, we call them Eskom, we actually provide energy so that we have lights, we've got electricity, etc., was in such a space that we had to go through load shedding, meaning that you don't have electricity all the time. You've got electricity for maybe 2 hours a day, etc., which also influenced academic learning, which influenced networks. You don't have Wi-Fi during that time, etc. So between all of that, it was really a difficult space to get students to be positive again about the future. But one of the wonderful things that we want to celebrate from this is that the South African Graduate Employer Association, we call them SAGIA, they actually for the first time hosted virtual career fairs where all students in South Africa could meet. They could meet with all the different companies nationwide. So it was not per university as usual. So everyone could have access to everything. And that is really a door that was open to us, and we celebrate that. The one thing now that we need to think of is how we're going to do the hybrid model. So how do we make sure you get companies on your campus, but you also accommodate for the online space?
Thank you for sharing all of these helpful information. Based on all our conversations, I see a few trends. First of all, obviously everything has moved online, and internet and data has been a huge issue for a lot of students who are unable to continue studying, learning, and having that experiences, because obviously not everyone has those access, and we have been very privileged to have those. And thank you so much for panelists for this session today. And we do have one question in the chat. I do want to ask that out, and any of you can feel free to answer them. So Ramya, I hope I said your name correctly. They ask, do students making this transition into the virtual context miss out on informal learning, for example, workplace and dynamic? And how can this be compensated for?
I would say absolutely yes. They're missing out on it. So much of the learning that we do when we're in a location and we're immersed in that location is just valuable, because we can't even put a finger on all of it. So one of the things I think that students should do, and what we're coaching them to do, is to try to think through all of the different ways that they can observe without being in a location. So coaching them to ask better questions, when they're having informational interviews, or when they're doing certain things like a small shadow thing, if they're not going to ever have a chance to intern on campus, on an employer's campus, you're going to want to try to be as effective as possible in understanding what are the things about this employer that you like, that you don't like. Also, I would say we coach students to look at how intentional employers are with their onboarding, especially in this sense where a lot of folks are hybrid. How has it been thought through? How are you going to get mentorship? How are you going to get access to people that are going to drive your career? Because the other thing that students lose out on is just the visibility of being in a location is sometimes a way to get noticed. And if you get noticed for working hard all the time, that's a good look for a student. So when you're on Zoom, you don't have that opportunity. Every single meeting is structured. Every single opportunity to engage with folks is kind of predetermined. So they can't walk by your office or your cubicle and just see you hard at work all the time, because so you have to think of ways that you can be an advocate for yourself. And we coach students all the time: seek out mentors, seek out sponsors, seek out people that will then help you carry your name at that organization when you're not even there. But it has to be incredibly intentional, and it's something we're training students as early as their orientation on campus, which is crazy. It's never happened before, but it's happening now.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Carla or Monita, would you like to add anything to those? No? Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for this session. So if you have more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, we will go on with our final question, which is a closing questions. Anything else that you would like to add to this session, and what do you think would be the outlook moving forward in career services in higher education?
I think it's important that career services partner with the incubators and the accelerators on your campus. Entrepreneurship is one of the budding areas that career services can help to drive the new workforce. So I think that's the one thing I do want to echo here. It is the way of economic development for many emerging countries globally, is the entrepreneurship structure. And we've seen it in many developed or what I call economically developed countries. You've seen people leave the workforce and go into entrepreneurship. The other way I think career services on campuses can move forward is helping to retool, retrain folks who have left the workforce recently in upskilling. So let me say that right. And wanting to go back into different workforce areas or continue into another sector. College campuses, this is what we do. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And I think we often don't consider the graduated or the population that's out there that can become part of our collaborative process on our campus, because many of these people have skills, they have experience that they can actually be teaching and helping, coaching and mentoring our up and coming graduates. So bringing them to campus to help them, I think it also helps our current students. So I think that's another way that we can move career services forward in the future. I'll leave it there to my other panelists.
I would agree with Carla. I think one of the things that I hope is exciting, and certainly I understand that we're still dealing with this pandemic and that it's been terrible, horrible. But one of the things that hopefully we can learn from it is that career services as an industry, I think it's time for us to kind of reinvent ourselves. And I do heartily believe in what Carla is saying about entrepreneurship. It certainly is an equalizer, and it certainly is a method for economic mobility. And it also is a method by which we can solve a lot of the kind of hairy problems that we're facing as societies today. But I think that career centers also, in order to remain relevant, I think for any organization currently to remain relevant, one of the hard looks that we have to take is on how inclusive are our practices. For instance, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is the service we're providing truly for all students? Are we leaving students behind? And the answer is always yes. And the next step is really, what are we going to do in order to change that practice? And what are we going to do to bring voices to the table that traditionally have not been at the table? Because quite honestly, it's painful to think that, we are in this great organization, this great industry of higher education, and we're supposed to be people that are providing access and enforcing equity and making sure that we're doing all these things to improve society, because it's part of our mission at almost every institution. But we have to really take a hard look at what we're doing in our practices always going forward to make sure that we're not creating inequity when we're trying to solve that issue.
In agreement with my colleagues, I think it's really now a time that we can go back to the drawing table as career services and really rethink how we do things and whether we are truly aligned with what our countries need. Are we really upskilling our students? Are we really providing the correct or the appropriate career paths for them? And I think it's also a good time to go back to our curricula and to look at what do we offer in terms of academic learning and what do we offer in terms of a co-curricular structure on how we can help students to better prepare themselves for a different world that's awaiting them.
I think the other component I'd like to add, Jenny, is education. And that is the graduate education piece. So folks going into respect and helping students plan and prepare for their pathway into master's, PhDs programs long-term. And, when you look at this it's also been a gap that has happened during this COVID period. Students have not been able to do that. And especially in emerging and developing countries where they could not travel abroad, how did career services help those students prepare for and find the scholarships, find the academic programs that they needed in order to continue maybe a master's degree or start a PhD online? So again, there's another gap there that we need to assess in the further education that comes after you get your bachelor's degree. And that has always been an area within career services, not to be neglected. How do we redefine that? How do we then say, is this, how do we now find the scholarships, the pathways for students in this new redefined segment of what we're doing? I won't say post because we're still in it, but as the pandemic starts to get normalized into us returning into open spaces, what will graduate schools do? There was a lot of waivers in placement exams for students globally that allowed access. Will that continue? And as career services, do we challenge that and help that to continue so that we're creating more inclusion and accessibility for students?
Great. Thank you so much for the closing questions and responses. We do have 2 questions and they're quite long. So I wonder if Liz would like to pop up and ask your questions, or would you like me to read them out?
Oh, I'm happy to read it. So essentially, being from the south of the USA, COVID has looked very, very different for us as far as not always being virtual. So that has been a crazy ride for staff. But regardless of whether students have chosen to go online or be in person on campus, I've noticed that there has been a decline overall in student recognition of on-campus resources, but particularly in the eyes of career services. How has career services made strides in educating students on resources and services for those students on campus?
I think for us, it's been reaching students where they are and where they have to be. So for instance, there are certain areas that they're compelled. So through the curriculum, we've increased a number of our integrated learning opportunities where we partner with faculty members and try to engage with students in the classroom. So an example of that is our psychology department. All students have to take a research methodology course. That's not uncommon for psychology departments. What we did was we talked with our departments and created an opportunity that the research that the students would do, because the same research principles apply, would be career research. So in order for students to start engaging with the principles of research, they would be researching different career paths and researching things that were career outcomes that they can look into. So that's an opportunity that all those students are now engaging. We also have really pushed hard. We've identified, and many institutions have, that, that sophomore year, the sophomore slump is a real thing. So connecting students to values in a really helpful way, I think, helps them connect to the institution and connect their learning to career outcomes. So being heavily involved in orientation, where students are compelled to be there, heavily involved in those sophomore leadership programs that we're developing for all students that they're compelled to be at. Really, I think career practitioners, and my role particularly, is almost all relationship building. So it's connecting with faculty, it's connecting with resources across campus with a keen eye on the resources that students have to be participating in, because that's the way that we can kind of enforce our objectives or reinforce what they're learning in that classroom. But it's a fight. It is, and it's always giving ground and taking ground, and it's I don't want to mean it to sound combative, but sometimes it is like, hey, how can we help you? And then, hide the carrots with what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Sean. We do have another question from Leah. Leah, would you like to read it out loud as well, or would you like me to?
Sure, I'm happy to. Let's see if I can get my camera on. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I've really been enjoying it. So I work with our international students at Temple University in Philadelphia. And, our career services have have done so much to transition things, virtually through the pandemic, and we've just seen them doing so much. But we right now know that our international students really need just additional help to navigate this. So I think the last answer about just understanding the resources and tying in throughout different needs, it gets a little bit more difficult when it's a large decentralized university with a small central career center, right? Our schools and colleges, some of them have their own career units, of course. And we've had a great partnership with our career services, but I'm looking for just insights on what comes next. I think Sean mentioned before about updating services and like looking to the future, especially for international students who have so many concerns about what that next step might be. What does OPT look like? What does sponsorship look like? So I'm just interested to hear if you all have any guidance about that or best practices that you all have been doing. So yeah, thank you so much.
I'm not sure that I have any best practices. I've been outside the United States for roughly 10 years. But to take a stab at your question, ooh, that did not sound good. To take an opportunity to answer your question, I think when we're working with our international students, I'm going to go back to what are the opportunities they can present to organizations within, in this case, the United States, in order to get them the sponsorship and the visas, the OPTs that they need. I think is one of the avenues to continue to look at. I would say watching the US immigration policies and what's coming out of there is also going to be a key area. What's going to happen with the visa process, what's going to happen with the immigration process. Not to say that that's going to solve the career services piece, but I think that will help students understand where they can potentially navigate from a legal perspective, which I know is usually the biggest angst. So being cautious of that. I do go back to what are areas they can solve within their local community, around the institution, within the institution, within what I call multinational, international companies. So looking at companies that have offices either back in their home country, or looking at companies that are multinational where they can also seek other opportunities, I think would be a good perspective for international students to see how they can navigate through this process and way through finding the resources they need to do that. Again, graduate school, depending if they're not already graduate students, I think is another route. And then I would say looking at foundations and organizations that can sponsor them for economic development in their home countries, if that's feasible. Also looking at, in that space, also entrepreneurship, what socioeconomic, what socio-developmental issues they could solve in a country that needs that could be a route for them as well. These are just ideas that I'm thinking through to help you, and I hope that was helpful. Again, just like Sean mentioned, I think the early pathway for international students is also more crucial at this point to get them into and be noticeable so that the opportunities for sponsorship and other things can come more easily and readily along the way.
I think to add also, one of the things that I think can be helpful and something I've seen success with at my last institution and starting now at this institution is helping to drive employer development to be educated on the pathways. So for instance, when we onboard new employers, having conversations about CPT, OPT, making sure that trying to gauge first whether they're aware of this, because depending on the size of the employer, if you're talking about a Fortune 500 company, they all know that language. They have departments that are helping them to stay kind of on trend with the national laws. But for one thing that I think career services can do in order to also remain relevant is help advocate for our international students by educating employers on just how easy these processes are. A lot of times I think it's pulling back the curtain and saying, no, just because a student is looking for CPT or OPT, it does not necessarily mean that you are going to be as invested as you think you are. There are actually systems in place. The colleges do a lot of work to help you navigate these processes. And if we can, take that, we're educators first, right? So if we take that and apply it to our employers and help educate them, run workshops for employers that are considering onboarding interns and say, hey, look, have you noticed how easy it is to get an international student to be here too, and even to pay them? I think that educational piece is the great equalizer. So kind of shifting our employer development to also include that in the onboarding process helps us to be advocates for those students. And the other thing I'll say really quick, I talk too much, I know, but one of the things I'll say also is that we have definitely seen a doubling down on refocusing on the student experience and making sure that we're going back to our roots and talking to each student individually. So it's harder when it's virtual because you can't sit across from someone and say, man, your shoulders are slumped. It looks like you look kind of like heavy in thought right now. But doing that and understanding, because international students, just like our American students, and I apologize, I'm using language that we would use in America. But international students are also, they have their own issues and they're going through their own things that don't have to do with OPT, CPT, and making sure that we kind of refocus on what they need at the moment in order to be a relevant service to them, I think is always a priority.
I think one of the other things, not necessarily for international students per se, but in career services per se, that how do we work with recruitment, placement, and those services that are very common global, necessarily in the United States. We use them in the United States because it's temporary, where you hear it. But recruitment and placement services globally are very common. And so how do we utilize those, especially folks who want to go from country to country? How as career services do we then take the opportunity in schools that are international, schools that are not US or Europe based per se, and help those placement companies, those recruiters, recruitment companies understand our students today? In some ways, partner with, they're technically our competitors, but at some point, where do we start to partner with them so that they're getting good recruits and they're learning that, it's a different student that's coming out today. So I know that was more of a question than an answer, but it's something that literally just popped in my mind that we need to be thinking about in the more international space.
Thank you so much, panelists, for answering all those questions. I hope they managed to answer your questions and perhaps giving you a little bit more perspective and thinking at the end of the session later. So again, thank you very much for an amazing session. I hope all of you have walked away with a lot of information and have a lot of thinking to do after this. And yeah, I do have one thing that I wanted to share with you all before we end, which is the 6th Global Summit that will happen in June 15 and 17 in Cork, Ireland. This is hosted by the Student Affairs Ireland and University of College Cork, and it's in partnership with ISIS as well. So hopefully some of you will go there and we will meet you all there as well. I will put the link in the chat or so that you can have that. All right, so thank you again very much for coming here today. If you have any other questions after the session, please feel free to reach out. Yeah, have a great night to anyone who is in the Southeast Asia and the Asia place. And if you're in America or other areas, good morning and good afternoon.